It's like, what the heck? What the heck? Okay. I almost forgot how I did my intro. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Soul Chat Saturdays. It's your host, Mawaya, here to bring you another episode specifically about self-love. Today, I have a guest on the show, Jules. Jules, he is the founder of Sustainable Lifestyle Gardens. So if you need to get your sustainable journey on very quickly, this is your guy. He builds... Well, I'm talking for you. Let me let you kind of talk a little bit about it.
Thank you, Asia.
Yeah.
My name is Jules, and I am the founder of Sustainable Lifestyle Gardens, and I'm here with the wonderful Mawaya.
What is Sustainable Lifestyle Gardens do?
Well, we build all-scale edible garden beds for sustainability.
I put him on the spot, so I'm sorry. All right, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about self-love versus selfishness. I know that this is something that a lot of people are now figuring out and feeling out, really, because self-love has turned into the love of self, which is different from self-love, in my opinion. Like the love of self can turn into a selfish endeavor, and an isolating one, really. What sparked this was, like, I saw a meme on Facebook, and it said, "Don't find yourself 50 and alone because you you self-loved yourself to cutting out people who didn't serve you instead of learning conflict resolution."
That's deep.
And, definitely, it definitely made me think about, finding who's worth going through the conflict resolution with, and stop cutting out everybody who doesn't serve you. And, what does that even mean? So, now I kind of want to ask you, Jules, you're a sustainable guy, you're a natural, earthy guy. What does self-love mean to you right now?
I think, in the past, and you're asking about right now, but I think self-love was, I wasn't familiar with self-love up until more so recently, having a lack of, I thought I loved myself in a sense of, I was doing things for myself, but they weren't the right things that was actually nourishing myself. They're more so coming from a selfish standpoint, but they weren't, but I wasn't giving myself the love that I needed.
So there's levels to it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
What were you thinking at that time when you thought you were loving yourself, but you realized you weren't? What were you thinking?
Well, that this is the way I am, and this is the way it is. In reality, it wasn't it's like a collision course, you go through, it's like not abuse.
I want to ask you something as you're thinking that through.
Yeah.
Because were you, just to get some clarity, were you thinking okay, this is the way I am, so self-acceptance, this is just the way I am, and accepting that, but you're accepting kind of a lower part of yourself, or self that's not so loving?
I thought I was putting myself forward when really I was setting myself back.
Okay.
Doing things that I thought were nourishing me, but they were really hurting me in the sense of let's just use alcohol for an example. I think this is something hey, I'm gonna do this because it makes me feel good. When reality, it's it's making me feel good temporarily, and I thought that was something that I was giving to myself for satisfaction purposes, but really it was negating the love that I had for myself.
That is so interesting, because when I think of self-love, sometimes you gotta be the parent of yourself.
Yeah.
And you can't let yourself indulge. So yes, on one level it's I love myself, so I want to enjoy myself. I want to enjoy things. I don't want to deprive myself of experiences and things. And, maybe it is a little bit of coping, but right now, maybe I need a drink, or maybe I need to, or maybe I just want to have fun, and, but then it comes to a point of like, there has to be a higher level part of yourself that steps in and is like, no, actually loving yourself is saying no to this because actually you're fucking up your liver, or or you're not, your obligations are falling to the wayside, and so this is loving to say no to something.
Yes. So just understanding that, and more so recently, my self-love is like taking some time, maybe exercising, or taking some time to listen to a good podcast, or reading a book, and like actually nourishing myself in that way. And I guess understanding that the things that we think we're giving to ourselves in a loving manner are really hurting us and taking away. So kind of just reframing that was something that I had to
So what made you understand the switch? Like, was it the effects of, so we're using alcohol as the example, but what if you, like, let's use working out, because that's something objectively good, but that can also become something that actually is not self-loving. So how did you make that distinction of, okay, let me start doing better habits? Was it the fallout? Did you start feeling just not 100% good in your body? Like, what was your aha moment?
Yeah, so I think with that, it's like at a certain level you're able to operate in any situation, whether you're doing this or doing that, and you learn how to operate, and projecting that good operations to everybody else, they'll never see that you are doing something that you shouldn't be doing, essentially. Even if it is working out, it's like, okay, you're working out, but you are using that as a coping mechanism.
That's what I would think.
Yeah,
if we're using that as
I think it comes down to, like, when you're using anything as an escape or coping mechanism, it becomes a lack of self-love, and you can spin it as if you're caring for yourself, and you're really not. But I'm sorry, what was the question that you asked?
Well, kind of like, what was the indicator that actually this isn't self-loving? So how did you go from like, okay, I am loving myself because I'm allowing, let's just go with the working out, even though that's not your example, but this is a good one, because this is going to be blurry for people. It's like, okay, I am working out, like I am loving myself. What will be the indicator to somebody who actually, objectively speaking, like they're not loving themselves, they're using that as a coping, like what would be their trigger to be like, oh, actually I'm not loving myself, so they can get out of that?
So I think for me, it was the indicator was that I didn't feel good having accomplishments, having achieved certain things, and having the accolades and people giving me the praise, but knowing in the background that I'm still not nourishing myself to my fullest ability. That's
so deep, because objectively speaking, it's like, yeah, like working out is supposed to nourish you. It's supposed to give you energy, get those endorphins going, make you feel good, release your stress. But then you're like, okay, well, actually, behind the scenes, I'm still not feeling good. So something is still wrong.
Yeah.
Like, something is still wrong, but I'm putting all my energy into working out.
Yeah.
I'm putting all of this effort into it, telling myself, like, I'm loving myself, I'm doing the right thing, but yet I'm still unhappy. And I can imagine people not wanting to let go something that on the surface level is healthy.
Yes.
Like, because they're like, this is supposed to work. Like, this is supposed to be the thing that is self-loving.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm working out, or I'm, treating myself to a spa day. I'm getting massages, or I'm, taking vacations. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do to love myself, and you're still unhappy. So I think that's a big indicator that actually you're not loving yourself.
Yeah. And
something is probably very specific and unique to you that you need to be doing. That's not the normal level 1 self-love.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time we get thrown like, okay, if you're eating good, if you're exercising, this is self-love. It's kind of like this broad, kind of like this overview of a self-love thing, when really it's like the inner workings of self, and just understand. I think taking time and just understanding what it is that you do need. You know, everybody's different. We don't need the same things, you know?
Mm-hmm. Self-love could be, for somebody who's using working out or even alcohol, anything. A lot of times it's like, I need connection. And that's that's what I need for my self-love. Like, in order for me to love myself, I need to go and connect with people. Because then I have, connection is like the number one thing that we all look for.
Yeah. And
we say that we're introverts, or we say that we want to be alone, we need alone time, which is also true to recharge. But at the end of the day, you can be alone and not feel lonely. So that loneliness feeling keeps us like, let me occupy my mind, let me just go work out, let me go work on myself, let me go on vacation.
Yeah.
But because you feel lonely,
And that should be the part that you're nourishing, is figuring out why you're feeling this way, instead of just putting it on the back end and continuing to occupy yourself with these different activities. Yeah.
Constantly suppressing the loneliness and like ignoring it. So that brings me back to the meme that I saw, which was, you're 50 and alone because you self-loved yourself out of relationships that were actually worth working on. And because you just concluded that they didn't serve you, which even that phrase sounds so like, it doesn't serve me, And
that's where it goes into the selfish aspect. And it's like, not understanding, like, it may be you that needs to be doing something different. Yeah. So I think that's important. It's important. Self-reflection as well. I think self-reflection is really important in self-love. And
I wonder if it's like a standard should be that when a relationship is not working, to not automatically make the assumption that it's all that other person. It could be 90%, 95%, 98% that other person, but you also have to humble thyself and be like, okay, I added to this dynamic in some way. There was some part of this interaction along the way over time that I also didn't act my best or do what was the most loving thing to do. And sometimes that comes from like not wanting to, you're tired of being the bigger person. Maybe you're tired of like initiating the conversations. You're tired of like bringing up the things that aren't working in the relationship. And so it's just like, you feel like you're doing a lot, but at the same time it takes two. And so I think that not necessarily mean that you have to take 100% of the blame, but if you don't allow yourself to also see that you play a role in the dynamic of what takes two, then it's easy to just be like, all right, I'm done with this. Like I want to throw this away.
Exactly.
And we're in the culture of, we have options of people. And so it's easy to throw people away.
Absolutely.
And that's sad.
Everything's so instant. We expect that things are supposed to work without, like relationships are supposed to work without putting in the work.
Yes. Yeah. It's like it's just supposed to work out.
It's supposed to work out, and if it doesn't work out, I'm gonna just scroll to the next picture.
It means that it wasn't meant to work out. Exactly. And it's like, you're gonna scroll. You're just gonna keep scrolling. Next. In your real life, like
in reality, and that's taking more away from your self-love than anything, because now you're asking yourself, what's wrong with me eventually? You're like, why am I not nourishing these kind of relationships? And I think that's when you come to the point to where you're like, okay, let me look at self.
But how long is it going to take for people to even get to that point? Like, like I feel like you would have to, if you're on this thing of like, well, it just doesn't serve me, I'm going to cut this person off. And it's like, well, you might have to go through 10 more people before you finally is like, okay, like I need to think about this. I need to like maybe look at myself. But now you're super lonely and depressed because all these potential relationships that came into your life, you just let go. And you didn't even try. And now you have to do some more digging, and you might be alone for a lot longer as you work through your own stuff. Yes. And when you could have had people around you.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, but I think it's hard to have people so like surface and then you go deep, So like being a surface person, it's simple to be on the surface and kind of just float on the water, but once you start going in deep, that's when it becomes difficult. And I think cutting people off is very surface and very shallow, or not trying to nourish, you know. And then once you start looking at these different things, it's like, okay, I got to dig deep. And I think a lot of people aren't connected to their emotions enough in order to dig, in order to do that work, in order to look at, because, you know, it's hard.
That makes me like emotional in my heart, because that's so sad. It's like it is a lot of work to dig deeper and to really get in touch with your emotions, and to really take that time to love on yourself and all the wrongness that you had, all the relationships that you may have effed up in the past, and really start to see yourself more clearly. And it's tough, and a lot of people don't want to do that work because ego is involved, and like you know, ego don't want to be wrong.
Ego is the enemy.
Ego's the enemy. Well, that's the thing. It's like ego is the enemy, but also it's there for a reason. But ego does F you up.
Well, it's there to compensate. It's there as a compensation. You know.
What you mean?
I think like ego compensates for things we're unfamiliar with, and it's almost like a projection of what we want to be, and we're not there yet. So it compensates for like confidence. So like if you're unconfident in a certain area, you may say you can do it knowing you can't, but that's the ego speaking.
And you completely bulldoze any emotion that arises that says I can't do this, and you completely ignore that side of you, when that's also real. Like that's a real emotion inside of you that's saying like, I can't do this, and you bulldoze it.
And instead of building the confidence in that space, and then separating your ego from that, because if somebody says, you know, you're rich, or I don't know, ego is just a very tough thing, and understanding that like it's okay not to be at that space. I think that's what's important, and ego compensates for that void.
This is why I call myself Mawaya, because it's meet you where you are. You can't have your ego bridging gaps and jumping leaps when you leave your emotional inner child, or your fears behind, or your, you know, your loneliness, or your, you know, you leave all that behind for the sake of like getting somewhere, which is really your ego driving you there.
And it's a shell.
It's empty.
It's a shell.
It has it's like full of hot air. Like, and then and the slightest prick is gonna blow it all up, and now you're back. And all that progress you thought you made, you realize that you actually didn't make any progress at all.
And I think that's what comes into the downfall of you destroying relationships, is because there's no substance. The ego has kind of built you up to this person that you're really not, and then understanding like, okay, there's more to this than that. That's where the work starts.
And it's so like I really hope that people are really doing this work. I know there's a lot of people out there doing it, and really, because at this point we're at a point where we have to have strong foundations and things. Like you can't just BS your way through anymore, because the internet is so vast at this point, and everybody can do literally anything that they want to. They put in the time and the effort. So like they're gonna, like, it's gonna show eventually down the line. You're not gonna be able to sustain certain things if you didn't actually build a good foundation. You're not gonna be able to sustain relationships if you didn't build a good foundation, because there's just too much information out there at this point. You can fake it on social media, but it's only gonna go so far because you didn't build a foundation underneath it. And the more and more social media becomes a big thing, the more and more lonely we feel. And so it's just showing us that the connections that we have are fake.
Yes.
Like our internal world is about to explode. Like everything that's inside of us is about to be in our faces. And we can't ignore it, because it's like you have to get your foundation together. We can't keep pushing forward at the rate that we're doing. Look at the state of like the earth, and like I know I just like to connect it to like the bigger things because I think it's all a reflection.
Yes.
So like think about Earth and global warming and like how we're just putting band-aids on things.
Yeah.
Like our ego keeps trying to push us forward into the future and technology and all these things, but we haven't even dealt with the hurt and the pain that we put on this earth, the animals, the global warming, the all these things. And we haven't even dealt with that. We just put band-aids on it, and it's gonna blow up in our faces.
Absolutely.
Like, and we're gonna be like, "Oh shoot!"
Don't know how to fix it,
and we don't know how to fix it. But that's the thing. Anytime like something blows up or a wound that's infected just like kind of explodes, you gotta clean that stuff out, and you gotta start over. You gotta start over.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't know how to hit the start over, or they're scared to do it, and they don't want to do it.
They don't want to be proactive about it.
They don't want to be proactive about it, but they're going to be forced to do it.
Yeah, it's going to be a forcing and reckoning, but you see that in your individual lives, right? When you realize like the relationships that you actually did want are falling apart, and you don't know how to save them. You've hurt this person, they're ready to leave, they're leaving, and you're like, what happened? What went wrong? And it was like all these little things along the way where you could have done something more loving, you could have done a check-in, you could have done something that was vulnerable, and you decided not to because you wanted ego, you wanted to choose that, oh, nothing's wrong, like, or they're just tripping or whatever. And it's like, well, every step of the way that you ignore, you get further and further down the line with nothing underneath it,
further away from the solution
until it's like now they're gone. Like maybe you can get them back, or you're gonna have to like start over.
Yes.
And on a better foundation of like, what did I do wrong?
As a new person.
What could I do? Yeah, as a new person, going in with meeting a new person possibly.
Yes, absolutely.
And you got to do something different. And so it is very tough. It's like, it's so much easier to throw people away and like not, deal with it. But you're going to be alone and you're going to not only alone, you're going to be lonely.
Yes.
You're going to be lonely. And that's what we don't want. We don't want people to be lonely.
Yeah.
Be alone. That's
community, cool. Being amongst a community, being amongst, common unity is important. You know what I mean? And everybody kind of getting on that same pattern of just always, I guess, I think it's really just like taking time and just going back and reflecting. I think reflection is important. Looking in the mirror. I had a hard time looking in the mirror for a long time because I just knew that I didn't, I was like, like, dang, I'm not liking who I see. Like, I feel okay, you know what I mean? But when I look at myself, it's like, okay, I know I'm not giving myself everything. I know with me not giving myself the love and care that I need, I'm unable to project that. So I would hurt people along the way. In reality, I was hurt. It's like hurt people.
Which is so true. Hurt people. Man. So I wonder, I want to give maybe some tips, and we're not experts. We're not, we are just people who can observe and think a lot about these things. And, what is it? Let's just try to come up with some tips of like what people can do differently in their relationship so they don't end up 50 and lonely and not dealing with things that don't serve them. I had a recent thing that happened in my friendships, because friendships is a big deal to me. Like, that's bigger than anything. And where I felt some type of way, I felt slighted, and I was making a lot of assumptions, and I have work to do in that space, and I was making some assumptions, and my old self would create stories in my mind and make myself upset and then never say anything, and either I would get over it and act like nothing was wrong, or I would just stop talking to that person. I would literally cut them out. And it was like, and they maybe they knew what they were doing, or maybe they had no idea. And I didn't even give them a chance. And so, I definitely saw that about myself, and it was very uncomfortable to like realize that about myself, because I'm like, friendships are a big deal to me. Like, and I didn't know how to do it.
So what was something that you
So this time around, I actually, even though I didn't know how to do it in a very tactful way, I did like voice myself. That was, to me, was a step. I made these assumptions, and I didn't know they were assumptions until I talked it out, which was like a big deal. And I had to trust that this person, that's another big thing, is like trusting that when you are vulnerable and when you do want to reconcile something in a relationship, that other person will meet you and not make you out to be a bad person and not demonize you for where you are. So that takes a lot of love and care about each other. And so my friend does care about me, and
Yes.
I should have known better, but my mind wanted to go on the defense and be like, oh no, you know? And so she showed me that, like, I hear you, and I'm sorry, like, it wasn't like that at all, and I'm sorry that, you know, but I'm glad you brought it up to me. And I was like, thank God. Like, I was so nervous that she was gonna, like, blow up on me, or, like, completely just, like, you just trip it, like, go off on me, you know, or something. And she didn't do that. She really did meet me with love. And I was like, girl, you're a real one. Thank you. Yeah. And that just builds up my confidence to build that trust in that relationship, but also, like, all right, I can bring up things that I'm feeling, because we need to validate ourselves first. Like, absolutely. Even if my thoughts were not in reality, I'm still having them. Yes. So I need to validate that. I need to, like, lay that out on the table. Like, I am thinking this, I am feeling this. So that's what I did differently. I, like, actually said something, and now with her, I know to, like, not jump to those conclusions automatically. And if I still am feeling some type of way, I can come to her more loving and not so, like, like, I felt some type of way that this happened. Like, that's kind of how I came to her. And she met me with love. So something
out of that I took was communication was important. Like active communication.
Active communication,
and
yes.
And then vulnerability.
Which
those
is so
are
hard.
two, and you know, ego compensates for that vulnerability, because we're like, oh, you know, it wasn't me, it was them. But without active communication, we're unable to understand the other side. So I think that, you know, that was,
I had to be proactive about it. I could not just sit there and, like, ignore that side of myself. Asia, you're tripping, ignore that.
But also being vulnerable to that hurt, or being vulnerable to allow them to voice however they're feeling, you know, instead
and be
of
willing
not
to hear.
And be willing to hear it, and not just making the assumptions that this is what it is.
On her side, she could have gotten defensive, because she could have been like, why are you assuming this about me? Like, don't you know me better? And she didn't even act like that. So she received what I said. So it takes two in that relationship. You know, it takes her to also be vulnerable and be like, Asia, like, I hear you, and you know, she didn't have to apologize, but she was like, I'm so sorry that you had made that assumption, because she understands. We talked about, you know, all that stuff, so she knows, and she had to also be willing to hear how certain things can come off, and if she wasn't willing to hear that type of stuff, and maybe there's some things that she could also tweak, then, and not saying that, you know, she has to, but, like, in a different situation where maybe she did do something on purpose, or maybe, you know, like, she has to be willing to hear about herself and be like, okay, this relationship is worth it, to where I'm going to listen to how I'm making you feel, and maybe there is something I can do differently, or maybe it's your problem, but we can talk about it.
Well, we can talk about it.
You know, maybe it's just your perception, and that actually I can't do anything differently. But to be able to talk about that is important, and everybody has to be humble in that situation and vulnerable.
Yes.
So,
and even and what I like about Mawaya is that even if the other party is not in the same space that you're in, you're able to understand that you're meeting them where they're at. You know, it's like kind of that it's like, okay, if we're over here and I'm over there, let's try to bridge that gap. And if it's a lack of communication on my end, or lack of vulnerability on my end, then I'm going to go ahead and take the first step in communicating and being vulnerable to whatever response comes.
To whatever,
yeah.
You gotta be
good
willing.
Or bad.
Yeah, you gotta be willing to hear that.
Yeah, and I think what's good about that is it allows whomever to understand, like, okay, they are doing the work, or, you know, maybe I am, and it allows them to analyze themselves as well. You know,
everybody's because a whole self-reflective moment for everybody, like, okay, but that's where you fine-tune. So, you know, I have a question, but I want to see if you had an example of where you see that you could do better in relationships, or where you have learned. Okay, so you said, what was the question? Well, like, if you had an example of where you may have done something different in the past, but you've learned and now you chose a different action
totally.
to really foster relationships.
Yeah, apologizing.
Mm-hmm.
Apologizing
was
is
that a big
something
difference?
something that I never necessarily thought was necessary. You know, I would apologize in certain situations, but even being the bigger person, even if I don't feel like it's always my fault, taking that step and saying, you know what, I apologize for whatever actions I did that created this particular scenario. Mm-hmm. I want to take the time to put that out there, and then how that's received from somebody else is, you know, so apologizing and not necessarily apologizing for the way that they feel, but apologizing for my part in their feelings.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother conversation that I definitely want to bring onto this show too. So I'll have to have you back. But about feelings and owning, you know, yes, I feel it's my feelings. I feel this way. And you're not responsible for how I'm feeling, but also at the same time, you can be responsible for how I'm feeling. Like, so that could be a whole other conversation. But I love that. So apologizing, that is hard. Yeah, apologizing sometimes is very hard. It's
and like, apologizing to yourself too.
Yeah.
Telling yourself, you know, I'm sorry, self, and you know, and I think checking in. Rather checking in with a friend or, you know, whomever, but checking in with yourself. And the same how you ask, how do you feel? Or like, how did I make you feel? You got to ask yourself that too. Yeah. Like, how are you feeling, self? Yeah. You know, like, what are some things that, you know, I think that's important.
Cool. So definitely, takeaways from this and, you know, vulnerability. Being willing to say I'm sorry, being willing to speak up, being willing to put yourself on the line, and trusting that the other person is going to receive you and not, you know, add fuel to the fire. So if you're on fire and you need to be seen and heard by the other person, and maybe you don't even do it in an attackful way, like, hopefully they can be water and like, all right, I see you, even though it might not even be about me. I'm going to help you cool down, and we're going to talk about this because I value this relationship. So how do we know then when we really should cut somebody out of our lives? You know, like, because I mean, obviously we can't repair everything.
Yeah, well, I think knowing is when the work on your end is being consistently done and it's not being reciprocated. And I wouldn't say cut them out of your lives forever, because, you know, once again, we're going to meet them where they're at. And maybe they're not in that space. You know, they're not in that space right now. Maybe they have other things going on in their life that are not allowing them to be in that space. So I think just like saying that it's okay and knowing that it's okay and just understanding that it is okay that they're not there. Maybe at this particular time we're unable to continue this relationship. Yeah. You know, but keeping that space open for them is important, you know, because at a point I wasn't where I am now, and I'm sure I'll get further and I won't be where I am today, you know, but like, I think if I had a friend that I've ruined relationships with, as I get there and understand that I can go back and say, you know what, I do realize where my flaws were, and I would hope that they kept that space open for me to initiate, to start new. So I think cutting them out is sometimes energies just, you know, they can't be so draining. But like at a certain point, it's like, okay, once they do get to that space, I think keeping that, allowing that space to maybe reopen. Okay. You know?
See, you're speaking it from your side of things. Like, if I wanted to come back into somebody's life, I would hope that they keep that space open. Yeah. What about on the flip side? Like, are there anybody, because I can think of a few people in my life where I'm like, no, I'm going to keep that door closed.
Well, it's probably because of their particular framing and their particular perspective at that time.
Or I just don't maybe trust that they have that, or I think maybe more so is like, I don't want to hold my breath that they have, that they will come back eventually. So maybe for the person that had to remove somebody from their life, don't
Don't expect
them to come back and change.
Well, the thing, we shouldn't expect anything. Because sometimes we revert. We may be right here a certain day, and then it's like we may have backtracked a little bit, but like it's a part of life and understanding that. But no expectations, because they may never come back.
Yeah, don't be holding your heart out like
maybe,
and it's like baby girl or baby boy, like just. You gotta, on ideal situation, they would, but everybody takes their own time to change and really reflect. And some people just feel too shamed to even try to come back.
Ego.
Is their ego. And they are sorry, but they don't know how to reinitiate. And they just will do better for the next person in their life.
Absolutely. And maybe that particular situation was for the next person. It may have not been for your situation.
That's big.
Maybe whatever happened within that, even if that door stays closed between you and the individual, maybe they're able to go and show up to somebody else in such a better way that it's helping them, and that's okay. And that
you're a pawn of the universe.
Yeah, it shouldn't make you feel,
okay.
I think it shouldn't make you feel like, it shouldn't be like, well, why couldn't they do that with me? Or why, it's just seasons and reasons.
Seasons and reasons.
You know what I'm saying?
I like that. Seasons and reasons.
Seasons and reasons. So,
and I'm sure they learned something in that too.
Absolutely.
Like,
we take a little something from every situation, rather good or bad. And I think just consistently evolving and consistently tweaking is important.
Yeah. Constant fine-tuning of our journey, because it is a journey, not a destination. As cliche it is a journey, and that's all there is. There is no destination. It literally just keeps going and going and going and going. So cool. So hopefully y'all were able to take something away from this Soul Chat Saturday about relationships, self-love versus selfishness. There's so much more that goes in we can go into, but we already at over half an hour, so we just gonna end it here. I gotta upload this. I know, right? Exactly. Okay. We can keep going and going, but hopefully y'all learn something. Learn who you can cut out, like you mentioned about if they're not showing up, if they're not. I have one other thing about that.
Yes.
Knowing who to cut out. If you do come to them in a vulnerable moment and you are trying to repair the relationship and they completely make you wrong and they completely blow it up in your face, I think that you can take some time away from that person. I would stop trying at that point, because you tried. And if they aren't able to, it's a type of quality of a person. And anybody can be this type of person, but it takes self-reflection. But if they're not willing to, if they're ready to deflect 100% and like make you a problem for you being vulnerable and voicing yourself,
then they're probably the problem.
Then I don't know if you can do much more other than drain yourself to keep trying that. So all right, I just wanted to pop back into my mind. So anyways, anything else you wanted to add to this conversation before we end? I just want to say
thank you, Mawaya, for having me on the podcast today. This is great.
Shout out to your business one more time.
Sustainable Lifestyle Gardens. You can follow me on Instagram, Sustainable Lifestyle Gardens, and check out our website, sustainablelifestylegardens.earth.
All right, thank y'all for tuning in. If you're listening to this on the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, go ahead and give me 5 stars, thumbs up, follow, do all those things. Just helps me reach more people, helps me stay connected to you. If you want to respond to this episode, you can email me at tribe@mawayatribe.com. You can find me on Instagram at mawayatribe. Mawaya is spelled MYWYA. You can also find me on YouTube. I'll drop the video of this on YouTube at Mawaya Tribe. So all consistent for you. And thank you so much. We will see you next week. Have a good journey.
Peace.